Well, once upon a time, back in my old country, in the Philippines, there was this woman. Her name is Rosa Henson, and she made a remarkable change in her life, which after 50 years, she decided to come out to tell about her story, how she was raped during the Second World War. I'm telling this story because it also changed my life and it laid down the foundation of what historically now is known as the campaign for justice for women of Asia, particularly of what happened to them during the Second World War, which totally has denied them of their voices. So I start with this story because it really resonated with me at that period in time when my own country is coming out from a dictatorship. And so the silencing of women's voices in my country has been ongoing for decades during, before, or during after the Second World War, because of the kind of governance we had. But the remarkable part of Lola Rosa Henson coming out is because of the fact that 50 years she kept to herself and to her mother how she has been repeatedly raped by the Japanese imperial forces during the Second World War. But her story started when another woman from South Korea in Seoul came out also to tell her story, and her name was Kim Hak-sung. And she started to tell her story because she said, I'm old now, I'm going to die, and I don't want this to happen to other women around the world. I don't want them to suffer what I have suffered. And so she called a few friends and said, I want to talk to the press how I was raped during the war. And repeatedly raped, not only once, but they were raped for months in the garrison. Now, why is this story very important to me and to all these women? It's because they kept their stories for 50 years. They were silenced and they were afraid to talk about it because during that period, women were told that if you are harmed, it's shameful to you as a woman and shameful to your family. But when Kim Hak-sung came out and Rosa Henson came out in the Philippines, they had the same story, two different countries, speaking the same, not speaking different languages, and they don't even know each other. And this is the story I'm about to tell of how women from many countries in Asia that has been occupied during the Second World War have suffered tremendous pain, and yet it took them 50 years to come out. And this is something that I think is really important for us to recognize why the voices and the silencing of women, has been part of the cultural system that we are, part of. So I would say this is not only a learning process, but more importantly, how our work as women to support each other under very challenging situations in many many countries, how are we going to really set up the structure that can help us find justice for the harm that is being done to them, to us, and this is where my story will go.
Your philosophical quote? What would
Yeah.
you like to share with us about
Okay.
your
So my
philosophy?
quote, yeah. My quote is from my dear Japanese friend. Her name is Yayori Matsui. Excuse me. Yayori Matsui was the first Japanese woman to be a journalist with Asahi Shimbun. A first journalist, woman journalist that was accepted in Asahi Shimbun. She was well traveled. She studied in France. She spoke French, and she never got married. She's very well known in Japan as a first Japanese feminist woman. And we worked together on this issue. And so I quote Yayori Matsui, and she said, when governments fail to deliver justice, women must create it. Isn't that beautiful? Nina, isn't
That is
that beautiful?
incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Governments fail to deliver justice, women must create it.
Women must deliver justice.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much, Indai. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And you are really a catalyst for women's rights and for advocacy. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I want to start now a little bit about your story. So you shared so many influential stories of figures coming out and speaking out for justice. And I think it not only resonates about, one particular topic. I think over decades and generations, there are things that we keep to ourselves
Yeah.
and that we're really reluctant to share. So I think regardless of the issue that you're fighting for, I think that resonates with every single one of us is what do we market ourselves and what are we sharing with others? And that also relates to what is the perception of us, right? So going a bit about yourself and your spark for purpose. I would love to know, how were you raised in your community, in your hometown in the Philippines? What was happening in your life, I would say, as you were raised, the dynamics between your family and also the community at that time when you were a child?
Yeah. Well, I have a very good childhood, actually. There's only two of us, my brother and me. So we didn't have a big family at the time when, my cousins, there are six, seven of them. My mother and father only had my brother and me. And it was a nice childhood. I mean, really beautiful. We both went to private schools. My schooling is for me one of the best. My grade school and high school. I studied in an all-girls school, an all-girls Catholic school run by German nuns. Okay, so all our teachers were German nuns, and they were very actung, always telling us to be disciplined and taught us a little bit of German. So it's really unusual that you have a private school run by German nuns in the Philippines, but they were in our province, and our academic studies were really quite good. But at the same time, when you have an all-girls school, you tend to rebel because you want to rebel. I was always rebellious even in school. So the beauty of that is, even if we had very good academic studies, the whole time the nuns were very liberal. They really wanted us to express ourselves. They wanted us to do things that we like, and we even have sports. So it was really good. But at that time, we also went out of our way to be as rebellious as we can. It was like a mission, especially in my class. The other class, they are all so nice and so pious and everything. But I don't know, our class was different. We were always trying to do something that is not of the normal. We were even later on when we all left that school. It's called the Saint Scholastica's Academy. They would say, "Oh, that class," because they will always remember us as the class who went on strike, the class that rebelled, the class that refused to go to mass. The class that we were always like, not all of us, some of us. So my childhood in terms of studies was really fine. My parents were really good. They were the most liberal even during that period. They allowed us, me and my brother, to pursue what we want. and what we would like to do in life. They gave us, I think, too much freedom. I mean, too much in the sense that every time I listened to my classmates talk about they were prevented to do this and they were told not to do that, I'm like in a bit of shock why they are prevented not to do those things, and those are just playful things, but it's, I think, the way we are accustomed to. And of course, one of the things I love when I remember my mother is that she loves to go and bath in the rain. In the Philippines, we have the monsoon season. Now it's called floods. But during that time, we have a traditional monsoon season that comes, like during after springtime, as you would call it in Europe. And during the monsoon season, the rain would be so beautiful. So my mother always wants to go into the garden and shower, in the rain. So we would run with her, or she would call us, it's raining, let's go out. So I love the rain. I That's why when people say, oh my god, it's raining, they feel so sad, like it's good. So I think it's one of those little things growing up back in the old country in the Philippines, that we have those perks in our weather. Now it's terrible. So those were the days when the rain was really nice and sweet, and you could smell the earth and the grass, and it was just really the right kind of rain you'd been waiting for. So, and the food and the fruits and all of that, they were really good. So I had quite a very pleasant, happy, or just a normal, growing up, and my parents were very kind people. I really appreciate the fact that they were liberal. At a time when you're growing up in a Catholic church, when all your cousins and family were very religious Catholic, my parents were very liberal. Like they didn't. If we refused to wake up to go to mass, they won't scream and drag us out of bed. That was not their style. So I think that also influenced my own growth, like to express myself, and for me that was really good. And the good thing is, up to now, all my classmates in high school, that was way back, we are all still very connected with each other. And I think it was because we were so naughty, they call us naughty at that time, that we really bonded, even if we all went our different lives after high school and went to different colleges. So yeah, it was a good time. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you very much. And I definitely understand how that must have been. And I think also giving you that freedom and that liberty really allowed you to shape and become who you wanted to be. So
Yeah.
I think that's really, really powerful. And I think you've stood for justice in spaces where it has not been easy to speak.
Yeah.
What philosophy or belief has carried you through this journey? And also, when did you realize that moment when your own voice, could be a tool for change? So talk me a little bit through your career and how you managed that, and how you've expressed your opinions and advocacy throughout your own career and journey.
Yeah. Well, that's really true how your own growing up influences you and where you are in certain points in time. After high school, I went to University of the Philippines, which is like the top university in my country. There used to be a joke. University of the Philippines was the nearest you can go to Harvard in Asia, because it was really the Americans set it up during the period of American colonization. So they made University of the Philippines really a top-notch university. To enter it, you have to pass entrance exam, like you are, applying for a bar exam, So it was really tough. But because of that, University of the Philippines was where all the activism came from. So remember, I was in college during the period when the Marcos dictatorship in my country, in the Philippines, started. And so that was that time when the whole framework globally was about decolonization, But at the same time, a lot of current governments in Asia were in that situation when dictatorship started to shape up. And so, while in college, I was studying political science, going to law, the dictatorship was really the main focus of the whole political spectrum of my country. Yeah, there was like a whole campaign against the dictatorship, to end the dictatorship, to have election, and to demand transparency. So during that period, I mean, the whole country was rising up against the dictatorship because of the fact that people once not only transparency, but they wanted election. And so, like all dictatorships, you militarize the country. So during that period, I was in the university, and all these student protests and student rallies were really, stepping up, not only in my university, but all over the country. So it was actually the student movement which really started for academic freedom. I remember the first like picket or rally I went to, it was about academic freedom. We wanted more of these academic subjects. We wanted more of this, but it was all related to academic freedom, which, slowly transported into, anti-dictatorship, because, our university was funded by the government. And so the restrictions started. So that evolved my development, and I think with the whole country evolved against the dictatorship. And that is how my own political transition came about, because you don't want your freedom curtailed. We were always talking about academic freedom. Now your entire freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, because the whole country is under martial law. Yeah. So when your country is under martial law, your civil liberties are curtailed, you know. So the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the right to justice, all of that were taken away, and the justice system was basically under threat and controlled by the dictatorship. And so at that time, I was so young, and all my friends were like, okay, let's do this, let's do, let's, we cannot live like this. It was as simple as that. We should fight for it. And so the activism grew, not only with me but with everyone, in especially in the universities. So actually the student movement took it off into a level where it became a national issue against the dictatorship. So during that period, I think one of the most profound thing was that everyone became aware of what democracy is, and what martial law is. And when your freedom is taken away from you, you risk your life fighting for it, because you are under military or control, you're under martial law. So it is the police and the military arm of the dictatorship that continue to suppress systematically the voice of the people. So, for example, in one of the big rallies in that time, and this was during the the 70s and the 80s, they were shooting people in the streets with live bullets, and people died, so students died. So the whole spectrum of our society started to rise up and, demand, justice for the killing of all those students and farmers and workers and women, who were really persecuted during that period.
No, that's incredible. And how does that then resonate with your career? Because you've worked across cultures and you've helped women reclaim power. You've worked in agencies and places where voices have been silenced.
Mhm.
What does empowerment mean from you? So this started from your community, from your environment. And how did you then grow this into your career? Because for many, it stopped with their community, and they carried on with their careers and lives.
yeah,
How did that resonate with you, that you made that your belief and carried that on with you when you know, took on roles, and also when you left the Philippines as well?
yeah. Well, it was well, I transitioned from that situation and we started to set up a women's organization, right? So I was part of the Asian Center for Women's Human Rights. And I was actually the director, founder, director, together with my friends. And we started to talk about women's rights as human rights. During that period, I think what catapulted all of us, and especially me, was that the other women in other countries are also pushing for it. You know, you start to realize, and remember, this was a period when there was no cell phone. That was the beginning of email. This was in the 1990s. I mean, we we were using fax to communicate. You know, I mean, I mean, really, the computer just started, internet just started, and so. But you know, the even the access to it was so expensive. You know, all those things. And I was working with the women's NGOs, and you know, women's NGOs are the last to be funded, and we have to, you know, do things almost for free all the time because we just believe in it. So I think what was really pivotal in the belief that you continue fighting for it. And that is during this period that I started to work on the issue of women's human rights. Yeah. So my first exposure internationally was when I was invited to, you know, go to international conference. You know, in Asia, we were already doing that exchange because at that time our issue in Asia was about specifically on trafficking in women. Yeah, and that was really a big issue on sex trafficking. And then when you talk about sex trafficking, because they are mostly women, then you talk about women's human rights. So we were doing this exchange between different Asian countries. I would travel to India and to Japan and to all of that. But when I was invited to attend the United Nations World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna in 1993, that shifted the whole terrain because remember all these United Nations meetings have all preparatory meetings leading up to the drafting of the, you know, platform for action. And I was invited to attend the preparatory meetings in Geneva. And that is where I met a lot of feminist activists, right? From Charlotte Vance to Rosa Lugar and, you know, um, I mean, Sunila, all my friends who are, you know, now icons into the whole of the women's human rights movement, Asma Jahangir, and all of this really remarkable women. We realized that in that, you know, situation, we were all part of a struggle that we were all fighting in our countries, and then we come together having the same purpose in Geneva. And we were not much. We were like around 15. The 15 women who became really powerful in many, many ways, you know, both, you know, nationally, regionally, and internationally. Because then we found out that, you know, okay, let's do this thing. Let's fight for it, you know. So when we arrived in Vienna, in at the World Conference on Human Rights, which was for me the best conference ever, you know, the whole issue, the whole global issue on human rights was really remarkable. You know, it was like everyone who wants to fight for human rights, you are there. If they were, we were all in Vienna. Everyone, I mean, really like the solidarity, whether it's Palestinian issue or the issue of the indigenous peoples in Brazil or our issue, you know, in Asia, everyone had issues that is all related to human rights and the universality of human rights. So, and then and you know, Nina, in 1993, the United Nations did not still recognize women's rights as human rights. It was only when we lobbied, all of us women who were in Vienna, and we insisted that women's rights are human rights has to be codified within the United Nations principles. And so the recognition of our human rights was only in 1993. So it was because of us women all over the world who went to Vienna and pushed for it and fought for it and to recognize that all the violations done to women in private are also public violation. So women who have been beaten up by their husbands inside their homes are human rights violation. They should be public violation. So the whole principle of, from the private to the public was really codified in Vienna, and the whole framework of what constitute violence against women, for example, was also codified there. And the whole framing of gender-based violence, which means the violence done to women was based on gender, on her gender of being a woman. So all of these principles we did fight for. I was the chair of the Women's Caucus in Vienna. And I have 200 women every day. We are meeting every morning, strategizing how we are going to convince the government to approve this framework, for approve for women's rights as human rights, approve that to consider that all crimes committed against women during the war should include all crimes, not past and present crimes. All these languages that we had to fight for, it was because the women all came together, and from all over the world. We had never met before, but we were of the same voice, of the same tune, and of the same purpose. And that was really remarkable. I mean, it was one of those days that really put you into the forefront when we were negotiating with the governments, with the ambassadors, and telling them what we want. And we were really feisty. We were not nice, nice, nice. No, we were out there and really demanding their attention, demanding that this is for women. And we would invoke, you have a mother, you have a sister, you have a daughter, you need this. So that was really remarkable that we were able to push for that. And I think that was the beginning of what constitute women's rights as human rights, but also the beginning of the recognition of what forms of violence done to women should be brought into justice. And so that is where my own personal journey, who had been ongoing demanding justice, really crystallized at the international level, because we were there, we were in in Vienna, in the United Nations stage, and we changed it. We got to push for a special rapporteur on violence against women, which we eventually got Radhika Kumaraswamy to be the special rapporteur on violence against women. So we created structures, within the United Nations system to address these issues that really confronted us. And of course, we did more than that later on, but that was a beginning of this kind of recognition. Yeah. And one of the things that was really particular in Vienna was during the time in 1993, the Commission on Status of Women, yeah, where you and I met here in New York, the Commission on Status of Women was in Vienna at that time. It was not in New York, yeah. So we were looking at oh my goodness, why is this? The CEDAW is the CEDAW was in, the CEDAW was in Vienna. So we were like, oh my God, we didn't even know it was in Vienna. I mean, and then we were inside the United Nations office in Vienna, and then we look at the agenda item. The agenda item was crimes, drugs, women, and nuclear proliferation. And I said, Sharon, we should take these women out of here because they included the women together with the crimes, drugs, and nuclear proliferation, because that was the Vienna mandate office. So anyway, eventually we got the CEDAW out of, Vienna and moved it to New York. And I think that was one of the achievements we have now. It's based in back to Geneva again. So, but during that time, we were really shifting the terrain in terms of all those, treaty bodies that has in anything to do with women. We just infiltrated them and just made problems for them.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I really love how you speak about this solidarity, right?
Yeah.
This kind of oneness coming together for human rights, because
Mm,
in the end, it's all related, you know? We
mm,
can talk about women's, we can talk about, justice, we can talk about, you know, injustice or any issues against humanity. It covers us all. But I think, as you said, until 1993, women in particular were not recognized.
mhm.
Also things happening to them separately, incidences home. I think these are things that go under the radar that weren't really prominent. I think throughout society, so many things have been happening, but it takes a situation and age, or people like you and from your community and from your team of women
Yeah.
activists to fight for an issue and to bring it to the world stage so it can be recognized.
Yeah.
So I think that is absolutely incredible. And I think for you also confronting injustice and pain, your work deals with a lot of trauma. I think uncomfortable topics. I think this is what you're talking about, this violence, harassment. It's very sensitive, right? Um, how do you hold a space from pain around you without being consumed by it
Mm,
and finding that balance? Because you hear all these stories and they resonate with you. And
mhm.
how do you overcome it, not to get fully consumed? And also, what is the sense of forgiveness to you in the sense of justice? So
Yeah.
really, how do you process these issues,
Mm,
and how do you see it also from a forgiveness perspective, that people can overcome these issues themselves?
yeah. That's a very good question, Nina. Really good. Because when you look at it, in 1993, when, as I was telling you, we did all this meeting in Vienna, the World Conference on Human Rights. This was also the period when the story I started with Rosa Henson and all these women who were raped during the war started to come out after 50 years. And we call them the comfort women. We called them comfort women because they were taken by the Japanese imperial forces during the Second World War from their homes, from their villages in all the Asian countries that was occupied by Japan during the war. And they were brought into the garrison and kept there and repeatedly raped for months and months and months. And some of these women even traveled with the troops to other countries, to Burma, to Malaysia, to the Philippines, to North Korea, to China. All of these women were herded like cattle and put into this, they call comfort station. And there, the Japanese soldiers would line up to rape them every day. Some of these women would say they would have 10 or 20 men a day. They could hardly move their bodies. And when they came out 50 years later, the 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 trauma that has been suppressed because they were not supposed to talk about it just broke. And that speaking out, we should really value it, because this is the time when we challenge the whole framing of justice. Because remember, after the Second World War, there were two war crimes tribunal. In Europe, we have the Nuremberg trial. In Asia, we have the Tokyo trial, right? The Nuremberg tribunal and the Tokyo tribunal. Both of these international tribunals, Nuremberg and Tokyo, were gender blind. They never put in their charter the prosecution of rape, even if they knew that there was rape. Because everybody knew that. Women knew and told their mothers or their sister or their friend about it, but they don't talk about it. Yeah. They just say it in whispers because women are just so oppressed that speaking about what the crime that has been committed to them is almost like a crime. Yeah, to speak about it. And yet they were the ones harmed. So when I started working on the issue of the comfort women, which started with Rosa Henson, I mean, I was like hearing her stories. I couldn't even imagine how she survived it. And she got very ill and sick. And she even said, I can't even believe that 50 years later, I'm still standing here talking to you about it. But you hear that same pattern of stories from the South Korea, from North Korea, from China, from Taiwan, from Malaysia, from the Philippines. from the Dutch women who were in Indonesia and from East Timorese. All these women, when they started to tell their stories, the pattern of the violation is the same. So how could women from 10 countries talk about how they were repeatedly raped as sex slaves, who they don't even know each other? They have different languages. They come from different countries. Some of them have never left their villages, and yet their stories are almost the same. And so when I was into this whole issue, and I said, we are drafting here a new framework for international law that will come from the voices of the women, because it is through their voices when they started to to talk, that we were able to establish the framework of sexual slavery, that it was widespread and systematic. That's a very, legal language of widespread and systematic to prove crime against humanity. And their stories really redefined it. But more importantly, how the Nuremberg and the Tokyo trial denied these women. They were not even heard because women are used as, oh my God, they were, nobody paid attention to these women who suffered during the war. Nobody even dared to look at how they were constituted. And let's be very clear about it. The Allied forces in Asia and in Europe were complicit to this because they had no value for women, nothing. So when we started to document and go through the testimonies of the comfort women in Asia and listen to their stories, then we realized that justice must be done. Even if it happened 50 years ago, there is no statutes of limitation for women suffering and for women to seek justice. I think women should seek justice all the time. Take on the opportunity how they can express the pain. But the more important part of that, which I think was remarkable when we interviewed all these comfort women, all of them without even knowing what the Filipino comfort women or the Korean comfort or the Chinese comfort women or the Indonesian or the Dutch women and the British women who were in Malaysia during that time, none of them knew that the first thing they said was they demand apology. That was their first demand. We want the Japanese government to apologize to us for the harm that they have done to us. They didn't ask for money. They didn't ask for nothing. They just want apology. And I'll go to your question about forgiveness later on. So first, they demanded apology. And he said, they have to apologize to us because they ruined our lives and they have to really say what they have done to us. And these women are in their 70s and their 80s. They're already old. But all of a sudden, there was some empowerment and courage, that they said, I want that apology before I die. And of course, for us activists who knew this issue, we started to look at from the legal framework. Yeah. If you want justice, we have to bring it to court. So we started filing court cases at the Tokyo District Court because the Tokyo District Court has no statutes of limitation. So we start filing cases at the Tokyo District Court, bringing the comfort women from the Philippines, from Korea, from China, from North Korea, from Malaysia. We brought them and start, filing a court case. And we got Japanese lawyers to represent us. And mind you, these Japanese lawyers, and they were mostly men and some women, never charged us, not even $1. As a matter of fact, they paid even for the plane ticket of the women to fly during the court hearing to Tokyo. Yeah. And so I think the Japanese women were really instrumental during that period. The women and men of perpetrator country, yeah, taking on the issue of the crimes committed by their country against other Asian people. So they took it upon themselves and said, we have to put this right, to make it right, because they harmed our neighbors. They harm these women. We have to make it right. So the women, the Japanese women and men who took our case, and they always were saying, we are from perpetrator country. As part of the perpetrator country, it is our responsibility to take on this issue and to ensure that we can bring justice to the women before they die. Yeah. So we started coming together and working together and filing these court cases in Tokyo. During this time, we would bring the comfort women. Some of them, I tell you, Nina, they've never left their village, okay? Now they're traveling to Japan. They've never taken the bus or anything, and now we're flying them to Tokyo. And they were afraid because they were told that the plane would definitely crash. Yeah. They were told every time they fly into the plane, they said, okay, I'm saying goodbye to my family because I know the plane will crash. I mean, that old way of thinking that the plane will crash. Of course, they eventually went back home safely. But they've never left their villages, and they come into this international forum with international media, meeting members of the parliament, of the Diet in Japan to talk about it. And they always say, we want an apology. Yeah. So one time, and I will never forget this because I do the translation for the Filipino comfort women. They would speak in their local language, in our Tagalog language, and and also the other countries, the Korean, they would have their own translator, and the Chinese, and the East Timorese would have their own. So when we were doing this, the one of the parliament member said, "Will you forgive us?" For doing this. Yeah. And because they were demanding apology, you have to apologize to us officially. I mean, we're demanding that the Prime Minister of Japan send apologize to these women. So one of them parliament members said, "Oh, will you forgive us?" And you could really see how culture influences the framing of forgiveness. You know, the South Korean said no. I will never, never, never forgive you. Yeah. For the harm you have done to my body and the pain that it has caused me, which I still suffer today. Because many of these women have broken lives. They live alone. They are very sickly. They have so much sick. They develop all kinds of sickness, sexually transmitted diseases during this period. They lost their lives. They were broken. So the South Korean women said, no, no, we won't forgive you. Why should we forgive you? You knew you did this to us, but why should we forgive you? Um, you don't merit to be forgiven. So the South Koreans and the Chinese were very vehement about that issue of forgiveness. But the Filipino comfort women, because they were Catholics, and Catholics said you have to forgive those that harmed you. So the Filipino comfort women said, yeah, we forgive you. Yeah, we do. And so because that was our parents told us that if we are harmed, we should learn to forgive them. That was what our, you know, Jesus said that we had to forgive. So the culture and the religion influence their thinking on the issue of forgiveness. And so when I asked them, what do you mean? And I asked Rosenson that you forgive them. Said, I forgive them because my religion teaches me to forgive. But in my heart, I am still angry with them. I am still angry because I lost my life because of them. I'm sick, I'm dying for the 50 years, that I have kept this to myself. But I know that if I die, I have learned to forgive the people that has harmed me. So even the framing of the issue of punishment, this is where women are in a way looking at this issue differently. So we said, do you want these soldiers to be put in jail? How we will start court cases and all of this? He said, well, we have ongoing court cases. They are as old as we are. If they can be put in jail, they should be put in jail. But right now, what we want is reparation. We want them to take care of our health because they were all sick and poor and dying. Yeah, that's all of them were poor and dying. And so, they said, we want reparations, we want compensation for the harm done to them. So, when you look back into this immense uh, process, I think what we have, and I will talk more about this in the next question, is that the notion of justice. Each one of us women have our own notion of what constitutes justice. For example, the Koreans refuse forgiveness. The the Filipino comfort women, they said, yeah, we forgive them. Others refuse, others agree to forgive. But I also realize that each woman has her own sense of justice. For example, when we were working with women who suffer domestic violence and were beaten up by their husbands or their fathers, some of them women, their form of justice is just, I want to kill him. They want to kill the people that was harmed. Others, they want to bring them to court. Their sense of justice is bringing the case to court. So the woman's sense of justice is really deep down in her heart, how she is going to deal with it, because remember, and we have to remember this very well, that we bringing cases to court, all courts are very patriarchal. Yeah. Courts are the bastion of patriarchy. They are making issues related to the harm done to women impossible to prove. And that is why, and I will talk about this in a bit, we organized the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal because first, Nuremberg and Tokyo refused to recognize the violence done to women. But we went way, way ahead than Europe because we in Asia, we took the case of the comfort women who were harmed after 50 years. Who were harmed and kept their pain for 50 years, and we brought the issue to justice, which unfortunately Europe never did. So this is, I think, a process which we need to recognize that justice delayed, justice could still be done, and we should refuse it to be denied.
Yes, no, I definitely understand. And it resonates a lot in the sense of having to prove, right? The evidence behind it, because how do you go back and prove something that happened 30 plus, maybe 50 plus years ago? It's very hard to come across that cold, hard evidence.
Yeah.
And it's also this human interaction, the sense of trust. The sense of trust is something that is also a feeling.
Yeah.
It comes with emotion, it comes with empathy.
Yeah.
So when you know, you know.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's very hard. I'm sure there is evidence,
Yeah.
and in many cases there was stronger evidence in others, and that's how the global justice system and local justice systems are set up, and that's the framework.
Mhm.
However, there is something more. It's just the human compassion and the human feeling, which is another system of belief.
Yeah,
so I think it's very important to allow that and understand and interpret both sides of it, because things that happened a long time ago, there's hard. I think nowadays we have a lot more control, and there is a lot more management on things, so it's easier to say, okay, I have evidence, or I have justice, or I have something written, or I have a trail around. So that really does make sense, and it really resonates. So thank you for sharing that. And it's also very interesting to see the different, not necessarily cultural aspects or different ways of the situation, as religion or culture as it does even within Asia itself.
Yeah.
That is very fascinating as well.
That's true.
So you really are, I mean, as we close here now, you really are a woman leader. So, being a woman from the global south, leading in an international space, I'm sure you've also felt yourself, in some cases, resistance or being underestimated. How have you personally navigated this? Your own personal journey of, rising and being a voice. And what advice do you have as well for women who want to lead with integrity, not necessarily from the region, but globally? I
Mhm.
would love to learn more about you and your journey and how you've been able to stand out, because I know your journey specifically probably has not been easy. And what have you also learned about power, difference between authority and influence,
Mhm.
and what you expect from leadership? What does the world need now? So I really want to understand a bit more about yourself and going through all the trials and tribulations now you have faced.
Yeah, well, all of that is true. I mean, I went to a lot in terms of, I mean, hello, I'm filing a court case against the Japanese government for war crimes at the Tokyo District Court, bringing the Filipino comfort women to testify, particularly Lorna Tomasa Terlinog and the other comfort women. But at that time, you you embody a cause, and regardless of how they look at you, you demand that respect, because they can they I have seen that many times. You get hit by racism. You're from the global south. How can you talk about international law and humanitarian law and all of this? And then we are the experts of international law. You studied it in the university. We are implementing it, So we are beyond you. We're beyond you. So, but it's also about having that notion of confidence in what you're fighting for, because regardless, we expect that there will always be a backlash. We were threatened, you name it, we had it. But by this time, after going through martial law in the Philippines, I'm good with it. I can go through this. You threaten me, okay, dear, come on, that's it, come on in. So you strengthen yourself because you had been through it. you know but we have seen it, all of us. The case of the comfort women in Asia is the most profound interpretation of international law and humanitarian law. And yet, continuously, the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal for Sexual Slavery by Japan during the war is constantly being denied. We are put into the footnotes, and yet the feminist jurisprudence that we have used, you know, to prosecute Japan for its failure to hear the cases of the comfort women during the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, is denied. Up to this day, I continue talking about it, and people will say, "Oh my God, that's remarkable! You did that." No, we implemented international law. We made the voices of the women and their testimonies. You don't have to prove papers to do it. Their body and their testimony is the proof of it. So we broke that notion that when you have to bring proof into the court, you have to have paper evidence. But those are very patriarchal notion. you know they always make sure that everything is written. No, this is written in blood. You know what I mean? We were saying that there's no paper, there's no saying that we rape her on this day and that, because that's a very patriarchal notion of evidence and proof. Our evidence was women's bodies. Our evidence is when she trembles, when she talks. Our evidence was her tears. Our evidence was her pain. And the mere fact that she could hardly speak about it, that in itself is an evidence. Because that pain, no paper can prove it better. No paper can prove it. And so we shifted this whole terrain. We challenged this patriarchal notion of how international war crimes tribunal, are being conducted. They wanted which general said that you have to run and kill this. No, we're not talking about general. It was widespread, systematic, and done. And we were able to prove it also on paper. So the important part here, and even during my own process, of meeting the prime ministers of Japan, meeting the foreign ministers, and meeting a lot of, dignitaries into the process and members of the esteemed parliament of the Diet in Japan, and we have met many of them, it was always about we have an issue, you know, and this is and should be recognized. And if you ask me about, the kind of racism, woman from the global south, running a war crimes tribunal, we ran the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal exactly the way the International Criminal Court runs a tribunal. Even our judgment is exactly the way the judgment is done, because we use in the customary international law, we use the Geneva Convention, we use the Protocol 1 and 2, we also use the Slavery Convention of 1926. All of this we have used, and we even referred to the Charter of the Tokyo Tribunal, War Crimes Tribunal. But most of all, and I think this is where we mattered most, was that we challenged the patriarchal notion of these tribunals. That you have made it so limited for women to testify. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to shift this terrain, that the relevance of the evidence is based on women's body. So what you can really look at is the testimonies of the women became the law in itself. It their the whole centering of the survivors in the process of the women's tribunal should be what war crimes tribunal should be conducted, not on the basis of some evidence and proof alone, which will take years. And that's why all this war crimes tribunal takes forever, because the men made sure, this whole patriarchal structure made sure that it's going to be very hard when you can see with your eyes, especially now with all the wars going on, that is already happening. I'm talking about we will have to bring forth evidence that happened more than 50 years ago during the Second World War. And yet we were able to do that. Why? Because the military archives prove it. They were there, and they were still in the archives on how the construction of the comfort station and how women should be abducted and brought to the comfort station and raped. They were all codified.
Wow. So
So
the evidence is even there.
the
That's incredible.
evidence was really there. The instruction, how to set it up, where to bring them, how they should travel, everything, the evidence was there. And so when we go back to it, you know, when we were fighting that it is women's issues that should be done, women's stories that should be recognized, we were still able to produce the evidence 50 years later. But that was because of the solidarity, because the women and men in Japan started to do research. We did our own research in the Philippines, in North Korea, in Shanghai, in China, in Shanghai, in Beijing, and in East Timor, and in Jakarta, Indonesia. We all of us. And by the way, we all did this for free. None of us were paid to do this. We had other jobs on top of this, which practically disconsumed us. But that was the beauty of it, because none of us, all the Japanese lawyers who filed court cases, they were really, they were doing it for free. They wanted to right the wrong that was done by their country. That was the issue
Yeah.
of it.
No, of course. Thank you. And I think just going back to what you want to resonate for women, now I want to really close with your reflection and legacy. So
Yeah.
when you look back at your journey, I mean, I want to understand what do you want people to resonate the most? I mean, what do you want to be remembered for? And what is your message to the next generation of women and leaders that are out there?
Well, my message would be we had to really be tough now in this day and age. Never be intimidated by, when you are fighting for justice and we're fighting for a cause, it should never intimidate us. What we went through is really, I would say, remarkable. The process. I mean, we have children, we have all of that, and all of them were part of the process and the sacrifices. But that is what, you know, um, feminists do. I mean, you have to take on your issue like it's part of you. You cannot do that as like advocacy, advocacy. No, that advocacy should be from your heart and bring it forward, because you're not only doing it for yourself. You actually, you hardly think about yourself. You're doing it for the women who have been harmed, but more importantly, that other women would not suffer from this pain that they went through. That is the goal there, that this has to stop. This violence done to women has to stop. This has to end. And the only way we can end it is we start fighting against it. That this should stop. And I think, to all the women and men out there, remember when we filed the court case in Tokyo, all our lawyers were mostly men, you know, and Japanese lawyers are very structured people, you know, good in their hand, but very structured. And yet they brought the case on the comfort women issue, So it's very important that we really take this with our hearts and go for it.
Yeah. No, thank you. Really, it's been a pleasure to have you. And I really resonates your emotion, your passion, your empathy. I think this is also remarkable, your feeling, because you really not spoken so much at all about yourself, but about your passion to this issue, which is really, really, truly very special. So thank you so much for being here today. And really, you remind us that courage, isn't just the absence of fear, but it's the decision to keep speaking the truth,
Yeah.
even when silence is easier. Because if we keep to the comfort or the ease of what is the norm, we will never grow, we will never change, we will never uncover what is the justice. So thank you, and thank you for all those incredible women activists
Yeah.
that were around you, for everything you've done in 1993 and everything that continues to resonate. Because I think you talk about women's issues and women's rights, but everything you're doing is applicable for any type of topic and any type of injustice. So it's really, really important that we speak up and that people step up with the strength and compassion as yourself. So thank you so much, Indai. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Tunina. Thank you.